On October 8th, 2023, Taryn Thomas was a sophomore at Stanford when she got swept up into the pro-Palestine activist movement. Other activists told her there were parallels between the pro-Palestine cause and black subjugation.
My questions about the slaughtered civilians and hostages were met with whataboutisms and slogans such as, "Resistance is justified when Palestine is occupied."
And she accepted that framing without knowing all the facts, or even knowing what really happened on October 7th. Taryn was all in. She took part in the first encampments that appeared on campuses across the country and fully submitted to the groupthink that Hamas was a legitimate resistance group. It wasn't until the Stanford protests broke into a building and turned violent in June of 2024 that she began to question the narrative. A visit to a Nova Festival exhibit in LA and later to Israel changed everything. This is our conversation about how a well-meaning, highly educated young person can fall into a destructive movement and what it takes to find your way out. Taryn, thank you so much for being with me here today. I guess I just want to start by asking you first who you are, how you got to Stanford, and then I'd love to know how you found yourself in the, anti-Israel movement on campus.
Yeah, so hello, my name is Taryn Thomas, and I am a fourth year studying at Stanford University, and I'm a pre-med student. I call myself an activist. I've always been super involved in politics. I did some volunteer work with California Department of Education and just done a lot of, volunteering around my school district. And so I've just always been just had a heart for activism.
So talk to me about kind of joining the pro-Palestinian movement on campus and what your involvement really looked like leading up before October 7th.
So my involvement for pro-Palestine pre-October 7th was very minimal. It was just I would make, posts that would say free Palestine or, but it was more so kind of generic activist post. And I didn't really necessarily understand all of the conflict of what was going on in Palestine or how complicated it was. I just kind of, again, I just knew that they were going through struggles, and I just wanted to show support. So pre-October 7th, it was just very social media activism. And then post October 7th, on October 7th that day, I didn't truly receive a lot of information about what was going on the ground in Israel. I had initially thought Gaza got attacked with the amount of Palestinian flags that I had seen on my social media, and a lot of people showing early support, immediate support for Palestine. In my mind, it seemed that there was an attack launched. There was a lot of misinformation being spread about what happened on October 7th. And one of the things I had remembered believing was that majority of the people that were slaughtered on that day were IDF soldiers, and that it was a battle and that Hamas was martyrs. And their justification for calling them IDF soldiers was that, essentially in Israel, that there's mandatory service. And so essentially all Israelis are IDF soldiers. And it was, again, it was a lot of twisting the logic in order to fit a more appetizing narrative. So many leftists and so many progressives were pro-Palestine out of the gate, I just assumed that, as a leftist, that I should also be pro-Palestine, even if I don't know all of the facts, that I would soon be able to, I would soon be able to gather more information as it was getting released and then learn about it. So when I first showed a support, I truly didn't know what I was supporting, and I didn't understand what was October 7th as a whole.
So after October 7th, did your participation escalate in any way? Were you more part of that group on campus? What kind of happened after that?
Yes, so on campus, there was a lot of flyers to join in protest and join in community discussions surrounding October 7th, but it was, again, geared towards people that are pro-Palestine. And so I just attended some of the discussions that they had and the protests that they had. And they would have speakers like speak about what was going on in Palestine. They would tell us that, this war that was waged was a long time coming, and that this was, this predates October 7th, and that we have to actually look, since the establishment of Israel and what happened back then before we can, dissect and mourn October 7th.
I guess the question on a lot of people's minds is what it feels like to be part of the fashionable group. Yeah. And I guess I now have the opportunity to ask you what it felt like in that moment to be part of the group that thought the trendy thing, if there was social value in that.
Again, it felt critical to voice your opinion early and as often as possible in order to show what it means to be a true ally. And there was, in a way, like a social currency of if you show your allyship, you're like a true activist, you're educated, you have all of these like different labels ascribed to you. But if you are silent on the matter, you are contributing to that genocide. If you are not vocal and you're not, and you're posting, like very nuanced, if you post like nuanced takes, it's in like the middle ground, it wasn't necessarily, like you have a nuanced opinion. It was that you're taking both sides, and you're allowing like Zionist propaganda to take an effect on you. And so, and anything that was not super pro-Palestine, and even just saying like, I believe in a two-state solution, seemed against Palestine and against the freedom and self-determination of the Palestinian people.
So when you're kind of wrapped up in this, I wonder if you can maybe explain what it was that you felt so deeply that in that moment it really did feel beyond question.
As I'm an African American woman, I felt a lot of sympathy, especially when I saw like the parallels of what was occurring. And on social media, there was so many comparisons of that, Israel's apartheid system versus like South African apartheid system. And again, even with like Hamas being like the Black Panther Party, we understood as like a Black American that Black Panthers were outcasted and looked down upon for their unconventional ways and viewed as violent, even though they were not, versus like a truly violent group that, and we never really got to discuss those harder topics of like, what about Hamas? What about October 7th? It was, I think, in a way, that method of like keeping us in the dark about how to go about freeing Palestine was a way to gain so much favor and support in the beginning. Because as soon as you support Palestine, it's very easy to then like get the ball rolling of like going down the route of being radical. And so without having to describe Hamas, without having to describe the past atrocities of the 6 Day War and different histories that are so important to why Palestine and Israel is so complicated to this day, those things were kind of looked over, and those things were compressed into a 2D narrative that was easily digestible. And for African Americans, our story of colonial subjugation and years of oppression, it's very simple. It's an oppressor versus oppressed situation. However, you cannot apply that lens to the Middle East and say that one party is oppressing the other party, because it's so much more complicated than I could imagine. And so as Americans, we are just translating our experience over to somewhere that's not America, right? People don't recognize that they have a limited worldview. It's very difficult to recognize that you don't know everything that you think you know. And I know, at least for me, it was pretty difficult to come to that fact because, again, I felt like I had an absolute conviction on wanting to, free Palestine by any means and wanting to, fight against my oppressor. And I thought again, with the allyship that Israel and America has to this day, it made sense logically that, America had oppressed my ancestors, and so them supporting a country and being allies with Israel, it made sense that Israel could be an extension of that oppression. So in a way, I felt when I was supporting Palestine that it's fighting against my past ancestors' oppressors.
What did you, or kind of the hive mind of that group, think about people who were Zionists or even just neutral? I mean, I remember being on campus and being a part of the pro-Israel movement and feeling pretty judged and ostracized, and I guess always wondering what the people on the other side of the barricades really actually thought of people like me.
As for Zionists, again, it was treated like a dirty word. You definitely did not want to be labeled as a Zionist. And there was a lot of paranoia, I felt, that was in the encampment, that like there was people that were Zionists and they were funded by AIPAC to spy on us. And I'm not sure if there was any exposed case of that, but I know that there was, constant switching group chats to make, a new one for our new encampment, and, discarding people that may have been inactive or may have, not been true Palestine supporters. And so as for interacting with Zionists at these encampments, there was just a do not interact with Zionists. They would, tell us, we don't want someone to, take a video clip of it and, we'd look bad because of, the way that you interact with them. And then also it was definitely drilled in our minds that debate was useless with Zionists because they clearly don't care about the babies that are getting slaughtered, and again, it was any debate or any trying to find middle ground was just pointless in their opinion. And so at the time when I was deep into these encampments, I just kind of believed it, and I didn't really spend much time interacting with Zionists. And then also, again, if you did go out of your way to interact with Zionists, you were going against the camp and what the established rules were. So you would be essentially kicked out if that behavior was shown. And so it created an echo chamber. And if I had questions, it was supposed to be directed within the group and have dialogues with people that already think like me or think a bit more radical. And and when we like I said, when I had those questions, those tougher questions about October 7th and Hamas and what does freeing Palestine truly look like, and to what length is that? I was met with a lot of slogans, and, resistance is justified when Palestine is occupied. And again, it's about the framing of it, that it's not a violent, slaughter, it's resistance. It was a battle. These are martyrs fighting for a good cause. And so yeah, that's why I say that it was trying to be digestible for us in order to, again, get that, not necessarily needing a consensus of what the method would be, but as long as we get consensus that we need to free Palestine, that was good.
I want to ask you, I guess, when you first started to really question those things that were happening around you that you were taking part in, was there a moment that maybe opened your eyes?
Yes. In June of 2024, at Stanford University, there was a protest that ended up breaking into an administrator's building and causing an estimate of $700,000 in damages. And in this protest, they, graffitied very anti-Semitic things, such as pigs taste better when dead. They, spray painted America with the KKK instead of a C. I didn't attend this protest, but when I read about it, I just was that's just too far. I don't know how spray painting these nasty things on our walls is going to make Palestine any freer. I don't know how breaking things in an administrator's building is freeing Palestine. And I didn't understand like what we were doing. And again, like there was so many justifications for it that, that this, broken property isn't worth more than the human lives that are being lost in Palestine. And again, I can agree with that. However, why do we have to break property in order to get to that means, right? But it kind of just reinforced that like destruction and violence was kind of a bit central to the cause of supporting Palestine. And instead of just realizing that like Palestinians want peace and stability, and I think we all want peace and stability, including people that are pro-Israel, and using these labels such as like pro-Israel versus pro-Palestine, again, that flattening of the issue. We all want the same things, but because of that othering and looking down upon another side for, their morals and having this moral absolutism, it's contributing to closed minds.
I remember when that protest happened, and I remember thinking, these people don't want the same things as me. Like, even people that I disagree with who were, to use the flattening terms of pro-Palestine when they viewed me as pro-Israel, even I could see what they actually wanted, which was peace and stability, like you said. But especially these radical campus groups, seeing those encampments, seeing the signs, seeing their graffiti, for me, that was a moment of clarity of like, I actually don't want the same things as these people, because these people seem to want to burn everything down, including this country. And so I understand why that would have been kind of a red flag for you. And I wonder if you can maybe describe the first time you maybe voiced one of these questions out loud within that group.
My question kind of always went back to like Hamas and what do we think about them as like just like being in this pro-Palestine camp, and are they doing like justice? Are they truly like resistance? And again, I would get met with that same answer that it's justified. There was just like a mob mentality, and there wasn't necessarily like true like critical thinking and truly like dissecting what these like slogans mean, what from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, like what does that mean truly, beyond just saying that Palestine deserves like self-determination.
So when did things kind of start to like unravel for you?
The June protests, that was kind of the first like true like what are we doing? And I never really got to explore it until I received an email from my friend Julia Siegel, and she has sent an email to all sorts of different communities, and I had received it through the Black community mailing list, that there was an opportunity to go to LA to see the Nova Music Festival exhibit. And when I had first seen this, I just was like, oh, I wanted to see, the Israeli propaganda and see what, they're talking about for October 7th, because, again, it was like kind of drilled and ingrained in us that like October 7th was not truly like a big deal. And so I saw this email. I was super curious, and I just decided to sign up and see for myself. So we took a trip down to LA. We had a lot of like pre-education, discussions and, kind of surrounding what's October 7th. And I was getting a better understanding of it. But again, I was thinking that this was still like propaganda, and that this was like, they're like leading us to this, this conclusion that they wanted us to have. And so I was still like kind of resistant to it. And so when we got inside of the exhibit itself, I think that was truly when I had experienced like the grief and the the amount of empathy for what had happened. And I truly did not know how horrific October 7th was. I never saw any of this footage on my feed. I've never saw anyone repost it. I didn't know even about the Nova Music Festival itself. And again, there was so much misinformation on what October 7th was. Like I had shared about like that it was mainly soldiers being killed, and then finding out that it was civilians and it was people my age that were just dancing and then fleeing for their lives. I was in shock. And in a way I felt so like misguided by the pro-Palestine movement, because I was like, why haven't we talked about this? Why haven't we like truly like had a discussion and even like condemned what had happened? I walked through that, and I think I just truly opened my eyes, and I realized that there's like definitely two truths to this story, and what I understood, there's so much more information that I just didn't know. And I think that my story isn't unique on the pro-Palestine side. I think that there's a lot of people that joined the movement without having all of these facts, without understanding what October 7th was. They just understand what, October 8th and beyond. And getting to see that and being surrounded also by just, we had so many diverse students that had came onto this trip alongside us, and that we were all learning about how horrific this was. And again, we discussed it afterwards, and I think everyone from that group truly took something away from that day. And I know for me, I was experiencing like such severe cognitive dissonance of like what I was told versus like what the things I was learning, and also that it wasn't like a statistic. These are human people that were begging and screaming, and there's just no way that I would have. I just wish that I wasn't so oblivious to this extent of this pain.
Did you tell your friends in the movement on campus that you were going to the Nova exhibit?
If I had shared with my friends that I had made at these encampments and sit-ins that I'm going to this exhibit, they're just gonna laugh at my face and then also just say like, why are you like listening to Zionists? And do you know that it's paid by AIPAC or something? It would have already been trying to minimize and shroud my the perspective that I wanted to try to bring to this trip and try to be open-minded. And so I think like I didn't share it because I just didn't want to be discouraged.
One of the things that I find so shocking is that you had never even seen, the footage that kind of defined that day from Nova, from the southern border. And I think a lot of people felt like if people just saw what had happened, there's no way that they would be in favor of this. But you're saying, I never even saw this. And I wonder how much social media really played into the kind of groupthink that you found yourself in.
Absolutely. I think my social media was like just inundated with Palestinian flags and think pieces on being pro-Palestine rather than just sharing empathy of the lives that were lost on that day. There was no room for nuance, and there was no room for grief and expressing, prayers towards these, to those that were affected. There was so much censorship and suppression of this content that I just would have never had known unless I had to like genuinely had to force myself to go in person to this exhibit to find out.
What do you think maybe the most vigilant leaders of the pro-Palestinian movement on campus would do if faced with seeing the kind of footage and material that you saw? Do you think they would have changed their minds in the way that you did?
I think it would take a lot longer for those leaders to change their minds because they believe they are so right, and they would have to admit that they were wrong, and and again, like that sense of belonging and being called a Zionist when it was such a, dirty word. And I think that's like a genuine fear for people that are on the pro-Palestine protests. And so I think the leaders might be a little bit hard to reach, but I know that a lot of participants like myself can be changed and can have their thoughts changed. That it's about a lack of education. It's about not knowing the extent and like the history of how Israel formed, why it formed in the first place, learning about the different peace treaties that were attempts to, bridge this gap, why it failed, how did Hamas form, even just the fact that of Israel leaving Gaza in 2005. I never knew that, and I thought that Israel was genuinely still oppressing the people there, and physically and being boots on the ground, occupying Gaza. And so I feel like so many of the pro-Palestine people have little knowledge of what is going on in the Middle East and the history, and also what anti-Semitism looks like today. Because, of course, as someone that's on the left, it's very easy to say, oh, well, no, I'm against anti-Semitism. And, when we think of anti-Semitism, it's Nazis and swastikas, and it's the very extreme, maybe Holocaust denying. But there's also more to that, that there's a modern day anti-Semitism that's like, again, Jews controlling the media, or Jews controlling the world even. And those things are a lot more subtle. And it's, I think recently they have called it like the Great Noticing. And again, it's just to be able to have like a scapegoat to be able to blame all of your problems on.
I wanted to ask you, you get back from this trip to Los Angeles. What's the reaction from the people within SJP about you changing your mind?
So at that point, I already was disassociated from the SJP group. I was no longer like in their group chat and like their group messages. And so when I had went to the exhibit, it was October 12th of 2024. During that time period, I was not vocal about my thoughts. I lost friends when I had actually got to visit Israel, and I had posted it. So it was called Perspectives Trip, and it was sponsored by Hillel at Stanford. And the applications were sent to people that had attended the Nova exhibit, and to see Israel for a week and have like education and get to meet Palestinians and Israelis on and hear them speak about their experiences. And so this time I was so hesitant. Like the first, when I had signed up for the Nova exhibit, I didn't, think too much of like, the social ramifications. But I knew that like if I signed up and I went to Israel myself, I felt like I knew that I was going to lose friends if I talked about it. And I was genuinely so worried about like being outcasted. And I just knew that overall I can't claim to be an activist if I'm not informed. And I can't claim to be an advocate, and I'm only advocating for one side. And I decided ultimately I need to go see it for myself and see what I've been protesting against all this past year. And so I signed up, and this was the trip took place in March of 2025, and it was for our spring break. And it was a 10-day trip, and each day was educational. It was definitely not tourism, even though when I had posted it, people said, you went to Israel to tour it? No. And each day we had new speakers, again, Israelis, Palestinians, but we also got to meet other Arabs that live in Israel, like Druze and Bedouin. And I didn't even know that there was other Arabs that live in this region. And it was so fascinating to meet these groups and hear their opinions and perspectives and their cultures, and see that a lot of them had also very nuanced opinions. It wasn't black and white for them. And our first few days we were in Jerusalem, and I got to visit like the old city and see the Christian, Muslim, Armenian, Jewish quarters, and to see them in such close proximity to each other. It was just, I think, amazing that there were still these, day-to-day interactions of them coexisting peacefully. And I think that image is not shown to people that are in the pro-Palestine community. Like I believed that that Arabs in Israel were treated terribly, and that there was no coexistence, that it was just straight discrimination and subjugation and oppression. But it was beautiful to see, them interacting and exchanging and especially in all sorts of like mixed cities. It wasn't just like separation. And again, with the apartheid claim, to see that it wasn't just like segregated cities, that there were cities that are separate, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's, like this is by design and that this is enforced, that Arabs have to live in their subjected like ghettos, and Israelis are like controlling like their and controlling that. Instead, we did see like the mixed cities, and I just think that I had lacked that nuance.
What was the reaction from people on campus when they did learn that you had gone to Israel? Like you had mentioned there was some kind of feedback, and I wonder, what it was like once people did find out that you went.
Before the trip, I did make a post, and I just said, I'm going to Israel and Palestine, ask me anything. And I received like a lot of comments, just mainly of like, why are you going there during like a genocide? And again, some of it was like out of like genuine, like, being puzzled. And then others were like, there's a genocide going on. You should not be there. Why are you going on this like propaganda tour? And then there was some people that like I lost one of my friends for years, she asked me like, are you in Israel? And I said, yes, I am. Like, you want to talk about it? And immediately she blocked me. And this is a friend. I would say that this was one of my best friends, and I lost her without even a conversation. And I didn't think when I signed up for the trip that would happen. I thought I would at least have like the chance to talk to people and tell them about my experience and like my nuance. And again, I was still like supporting like, Palestine's like self-determination. And so I just thought like we would be able to like discuss and have these like open conversations, but it was not like that. And I was just at a loss when I saw so many people unfollow me. And when I that was the pre-trip. I wasn't even in Israel yet. And I went to Israel and I posted, I believe it was Israelis protesting against the government. I just, did a video, didn't put any caption or say that I'm for it or against it. I think I just put a clarification that Israelis are protesting against the government. Because I was hoping that it would incite some people to say like, oh, well, there are Israelis that recognize that the government is, their methods might are like violent or like et cetera, but there are Israelis that do condone some of the actions, and so maybe there is like middle ground to be found, and separating Israelis from the government. I think that was the my main point, and so when I posted it. That again, it just the ball kept rolling of of people asking me like, why are you even there? And then I also received a flood of like racist comments, and one of the ones that I remember distinctly was, "Are you a monkey tap dancing for your master?" And that was so shocking because like the person that sent it to me was a leftist, and for them to revert to racism when I thought we're all on the same side, it was just a bit heartbreaking.
So this past October 7th, you spoke at a vigil on Stanford's campus, and you started by saying, a year ago I would have been on the other side of campus protesting people that you were speaking to.
A year ago, I would have been on the other side of campus participating in a counter-protest, armed with megaphone and a conviction I thought was absolute. After October 7th, 2023, social media flattened a century of history into 2 opposing hashtags. Soon, supporting the Palestinian cause became a litmus test for activists like myself.
Also just want to know what it's been like to be embraced by a group that you really thought you were fighting against.
I was so shocked, for one. Again, after visiting Israel, I felt so isolated, and I was like at a point of just like I was losing so many friends. I didn't really have anyone to talk to about like the things I witnessed and experienced. But the people that I made friends with like at this perspectives trip are like still my best friends to this day, and I learned so much from like my Jewish friends and about their experiences with like anti-Semitism on campus. I was embraced by the Jewish community, and I did feel like I could call like Hillel my home and have, I would stay for like Shabbat and, have these dinners, and we would, talk about politics and disagree. And that was like very different. And it was so like enlightening to be able to like have these very nuanced conversations, and even just to talk about our differences, and like the things that I learned, versus what they know. And also just like to talk about, my identity as being Black, and then learning, that there's, different types of Jewish. It's not just Ashkenazi Jews. And so there was a lot of, for one, I truly appreciated my friends for being patient enough to stay and educate me on things that I wish I've already known. But that patience and support truly like helped me be able to, again, want to show more Black and Jewish solidarity. And it's so important that more people like me are coming forward to try to show support and let the Jewish community know that they're not alone in this battle. Because it's the past like 2 years, I'm sure it's been a very lonely road. And so I'm also just trying to undo some of the damage that I've done, as my Jewish friends are telling me about how the campus made them feel unsafe. I take it to heart because I contributed to that unsafe feeling. And so I feel a deep sense of personal responsibility to speak out openly and publicly and try my best to spread this message as much as I can, to know that there's still more people out there like me, and we just have to reach them.
How do you learn to trust your own mind again after realizing that you'd really been caught in a groupthink?
I think now I'm a lot more cautious when it comes to international issues. Although it's great to seem like I'm well informed and I'm able to support other countries that are going through their own strifes, I, at the end of the day, only have like my limited worldview, and I have to like humble myself and realize like I don't know everything. And even when I do see something, is there more to the story that I'm not seeing? And so I do second guess myself a lot more now, and I'm still trying to, try to find line of, still supporting, again, the self-determination of Palestinians, but also the self-determination of Jewish, and trying to hold both of those without losing the other side. And again, having those nuances, it's definitely a hard thing, especially with the way that social media, dissuades. But I'm trying my best. Yeah.
What do you think that people outside of this movement, and I would include myself in that, get the most wrong about groups like SJP? Like, what are we misunderstanding about them?
I think it goes back to just the level of ignorance. I think that there is a lot of anti-Semitism within these groups, and I think that I want to definitely validate that does exist. However, I think that there's a lot of people that are genuinely ignorant that got swept into supporting something that they don't truly understand, and I think a lot of people that are on the pro-Israel side may not realize the constant comparisons of Palestine to other minority struggles and the and how it affects us, that we want to do whatever we can to show support. And so I wish that I hope that more pro-Israel supporters can realize that there are people that can get educated, that there are people that they can still reach and have these dialogues with. It's just right now it's really difficult.
If you could say something to the students still inside the echo chamber that you really so bravely left, what would you say to them?
First, I would just tell them to ask questions, and when you don't get those answers, to talk to the other side. Because at the end of the day, if you are truly an activist and you truly want to see change, it starts with your neighbor. And it starts with having those open dialogues. And you might see the world in a different way, but your neighbor also sees the world in a different way. And change can inspire you as well, right? And so putting yourself in the shoes of the people that are the most antithetical of your political opinion, and being able to still suspend your beliefs and have that empathy, I think that is the most crucial thing for anyone to have.
So much of what you've experienced over the past couple of years is really about the Black-Jewish relationship, which used to be one of the strongest allyships and is kind of broken down. And I wonder what these 2 years have really taught you about that.
I think that we have a long way to go on restoring the Black and Jewish solidarity. However, I don't think that I think that there's a lot of people on the middle ground in the Black community. I think that there's a lot for the older generation, and my parents, they identify themselves as Zionists because they witnessed the 60s and saw, the rabbis walking hand in hand with Martin Luther King, and seeing that that solidarity from the beginning. And however, my generation doesn't have that point of reference. And so, we had Black Lives Matter, but it was hard to see what other communities were supporting. And so at the end of the day, solidarity is not transactional. And if we miss out on this opportunity to show solidarity, we also, it's a two-way relationship. And it has to start from somewhere. And so that's why I want to put my face out there and show that they're not alone, and there's more people and there's more minorities that do support Jewish self-determination and to fight against anti-Semitism and to speak up. And I think that there's a lot that our communities can learn together.
Taryn, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story. I and the Free Press are very grateful. Thank you.
No, thank you for having me. I really appreciate you listening.